Okay, hi, Ebony McGee and David Stovall. It's good to talk with you. My name is Nick Berbulis, and I'm the editor of the journal Educational Theory. We published a paper of yours in 2015 called Reimagining Critical Race Theory in Education. And the article is a really interesting article that raises, I think, a number of issues that are of particular relevance given the events of the current moment. And I wanted to have a chance to talk with you and interview you and give you a chance to talk about the issues in your paper and how you see them tying into the current discussion around police violence, systemic racism, and of course larger issues of disadvantage and inequality in our society. So that's a starting point question, and I look forward to getting your thoughts.
Dave, I'd like you to go first with that.
Oh, no problem. Again, Nick, thanks so much for having us. I think when we talk about the current moment and the paper that we wrote 4 years ago, one of the things that we were challenging folks to think about was that when we talk about the things that happen to Black people and the rationalization that's placed on Black bodies, that this is nothing new, right? Mm-hmm. So the current events of Black death at the hands of the state is nothing new. Right? This idea of health disparities when we talk about the COVID situation is nothing new. Is to what extent will the larger white society pay attention to what has been told to folks in time immemorial?
Yes, I think one of the things that this paper did is that it shone a light to how we look at success. So these were all high achieving students that we talked about in this essay, and my work focuses on, only high achievers, and to really problematize their success from a mental and physical health standpoint, like success at what cost? So there is a huge cost to students of color who have to strip themselves of their own racial, authentic identities in order to achieve, particularly in STEM fields. But we never talk about this population because we assume that they're all good. This is the population that we tokenize. This is the population that we put on the front of our university magazines and covers. So we assume that they're fine, but they are not fine. They are being traumatized. And Dave and I wanted to have a language to talk to that population as to say your high achievement doesn't save you from racism. Being middle class doesn't save you from racism. Having a PhD does not save you from racism. So this is something that the educational community should be aware of and should work to alleviate.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. So one of the common explanations that's given for the success of minority youth in particularly higher education is the language of grit or perseverance, that these are people of strength of character and determination and self-discipline, and that's what drives their success. And what I hear you saying is that's not a very complete explanation, and that even that success comes at a personal and mental health cost.
Yeah, grit normalizes Black suffering. Grit says it's okay for you to not be mentally well. Mm-hmm. And it is your responsibility to conquer hundreds of years of structural racism. You talk about George Floyd with somebody pressing down on his neck. We're talking about hundreds of knees all over your body. And all of a sudden you're supposed to just rise to the occasion and be gritty. It ignores the social and material constraints that students of color face.
And just something real quick around that, grit becomes this kind of false pathology, right? So this idea that people are able to do things on their own when we totally ignore support systems, right? So when we talk about people who are actually able to do this in spite of white supremacy, in spite of the deficits that are falsely placed on them, we don't ever think about the systems of support. So when grit becomes popularized, it's only popularizing an incomplete story. And I think that's what we were trying to pull out, that story is incomplete. And even in these spaces where you do have some form of support, you still have to engage in these things that are never asked of your peers in these particular programs.
Yeah,
I just want to add on to that and make one. I can't clarify how important Dave talking about external support. Asking somebody to be grit without proper and appropriate and culturally relevant support systems is just another form of oppression. So by asking someone to be gritty without giving them the proper supports is asking a student to be oppressed.
One of the things I think that's interesting about the paper is the mental health dimensions of your analysis and the really detailed, the anecdotes, the personal narratives that you talk about that really show at a human level how these stresses actually bear upon the mental health of students. And of course, the name of the journal is Educational Theory. And one of the things I think that's interesting about your paper, looking at it as a contribution to theory, is I won't call it the critique exactly, but the suggestion or the recommendation that critical race theory needs to be supplemented by a theory of mental health. And that's an important aspect of rethinking critical race theory, not only in the present moment, but as a useful tool for really understanding these kinds of dynamics. Do you want to say more about that?
Sure. You know, I was interviewing these high achieving STEM students, and I did not anticipate, nor did I have the tools for when they actually broke down in the middle of the interview, you know, and seeing all the trauma. And I took Dave's critical race theory class as a second semester incoming PhD student. So I was very clear with what critical race theory is and how it's operationalized. But in the moment, in those interviews, I did not know what to do, and I didn't have really strong language to pull on. But I have to acknowledge the work of William Smith, who gave us a theory of racial battle fatigue. But that didn't go enough into the structural ramifications of how mental health is a structural outcome of racism.
Just something super quick in terms of critical race theory has always been understood as a bridge, right? So, and that bridge is to understanding all the various intersections that occur in relationship to racism and white supremacy. So it's really this understanding around, we recognize white supremacy to exist, and here are the things that we can actually do to address it and combat it. And one of the things that Ebony was pulling from in the interviews that I tried to supplement is this idea that critical race theory can now provide a pathway for us to begin to incorporate mental health, right? And we actually were looking at a lot of the folks in public health who were doing this work preceding us. So Chandra Ford out of UCLA, and then another group of folks who were doing CRT in relationship to medical definitions of racism. So Kamara Jones actually had, when she was at the CDC, she offered up a medical definition of racism and white supremacy. So we wanted to pull from those and incorporate CRT as this bridge for us to now begin to understand the broader scope of the reaches of racism and white supremacy.
I want to say one last thing. One of the things that Dave brought to the paper was Sean Jenright's concept of radical healing. And I think it's such an important concept because I could not see past racism. So I could not envision a future that was anti-racist, a future that was equitable. And what Dave suggested and brought beautifully to the paper is that we have to see what a world looks like past racism and work backwards to achieve that. So I think that that's a really good contribution, that we don't have to be stuck in the sea of racism, that there's a way that, you know, collectively we can swim out.
Yeah, so thank you both for that. One final question. I'm just kind of curious about this. So, you know, Ed Theory is an academic journal, and we're happy when people read our articles, but we don't have much experience with articles that we publish being picked up and promoted in the national press. And I'm curious about that aspect of your experience, what it's like to have your research, academic research suddenly given visibility within a broader circle, and what that experience was like for the two of you.
So it was both invigorating and heartbreaking. So, you know, invigorating that people, you know, really resonated with the work, but how heartbreaking is it to now get emails of folks talking about how they had mental health attacks, you know, in their labs, in their job, in their academic positions, you know, just to hear how this resonated and how this is really impacting communities of color, particularly in academia, but also in industry as well. It was sobering for me.
David?
Yeah, and the same. It was sobering in that people were contacting us like it was this new thing, right? And our responses were always, we're going back 70 years worth of, with 70 years worth of data around this, right? So it's not this new thing where it's good that the message gets out to more folks, but at the same time, it's sobering in the fact that people are still asking us questions like, I didn't know it was that bad, or wow, we never understood to what extent this existed. So, I mean, I think, again, that sobering notion that this is thought of as something new.
And I also want to say, it really hasn't impacted universities. So it's good that we got a lot of press, but what we were asking for is more counselors of color, more Black psychiatrists, more Black sociologists, more Black, you know, what we need in order to move towards the path of healing is we need more Black mental health bodies and minds, you know, who are on the front lines of trying to tackle some of these issues that are affecting students, faculty, staff, industry, et cetera, et cetera. So we still, although we appreciated, you know, the love, we still have a long way to go in terms of institutionally putting some of the suggestions we had into practice in universities.
Ebony, David, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. I hope that this video draws attention to your really terrific article and the research and the ideas behind it. Thanks for meeting with us.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Okay, take care.